Mother-in-law slid a folded check across the dinner table and told me it was the most generous offer I'd ever receive in my life. $40,000. All I had to do was sign the annulment papers, disappear from her son's life, and never tell anyone the baby I was carrying belonged to a Hargrove. She said it the way you'd offer to take out the trash. Helpful. Practical. Like she was doing me a favor by erasing me. I didn't take the check. I didn't scream either. I just looked at her across the candlelight, at the pearls she wore even to a Tuesday dinner, and I asked her something that made her hand freeze halfway to her wineglass. 7 years later, that same woman stood on my porch in the rain, soaked through her cashmere coat, knocking on my door and begging to see her granddaughter. And I leaned into the doorbell camera and said, "What granddaughter? I don't know what you're talking about," before I tell you how her face came apart right there on my welcome mat. I want to know you're here with me. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Tell me your city, your town, the highway exit you live off of. I read every single one, and I want to know who's sitting with me tonight. So let me take you back. My name is Delphine Okafor right now. But back then I was just Delphine Marsh, 24 years old, working 2 jobs in Cleveland, and engaged to a man named Theodore Hargrove, whose family had a wing named after them at the regional hospital. I met Theo at the diner where I waited tables on the east side. He came in alone, ordered black coffee and a slice of pie he never touched, and stayed until close just to talk to me. For 8 months I thought I'd found something real. He was gentle in a way that felt rare. He noticed things. He remembered that I hated cilantro and that my mother had passed when I was 19, and that I was 3 classes short of a nursing degree I'd had to abandon when the money ran out. What I didn't understand then was that gentleness without a spine is just another kind of cruelty. It takes longer to hurt you, that's all. His mother was named Cordelia, and the first time I met her, she looked at my shoes. Not my face. My shoes. They were clean, but they were from a discount store, and I watched her catalog that fact and file it away somewhere she'd use it later. The Hargroves had old money, the kind that came from a chain of funeral homes Cordelia's grandfather built across 3 counties during the Depression. There's a particular arrogance that comes from generations of profiting off other people's grief. They learn early that everyone eventually needs them, and they never forget it. I got pregnant the spring before the wedding. It wasn't planned, but I wasn't ashamed. I was happy. Theo was happy, or he said he was. Sitting on the edge of my bathtub while I cried with relief and a little fear, he held my hands and told me we'd figure it out together. He told me he loved me. Then he told his mother. The dinner where she offered me the $40,000 happened a week later. Theo wasn't even at the table. She'd arranged it that way, called and invited me to the country club like she wanted to welcome me into the family, and I put on the one nice dress I owned and taken 2 buses to get there. She let me order. She let me eat. She waited until the plates were cleared and then she opened her purse. She said her son had a future, law school, then politics maybe. The kind of life that didn't have room for a waitress and a baby that came too soon. She said it wasn't personal. She actually used those words. "It wasn't personal," she said, sliding that check toward me. "It's just that some people are meant to be footnotes in a story and some people are meant to write it." That's when I asked her the question that froze her hand. I asked her if she'd ever told Theo what she did to his older sister. I'd heard things, you see, from the staff at the club, from an old housekeeper Theo barely mentioned. There'd been a daughter before Theo, a girl named Margaret who got pregnant young and was sent away and never spoken of again. I didn't know the details. I was bluffing, mostly, but the way Cordelia's face went white told me I'd hit something true, something buried so deep she'd convinced herself it never happened. She took the check back. She told me I had no idea what I was dealing with. And she was right. I didn't. What I learned over the next month was that you cannot win a war against people who own the battlefield. The Hargroves owned half of Cleveland's legal establishment. When I tried to talk to Theo alone, his calls stopped coming. When I went to his apartment, there was a new doorman who didn't know my name. And then the letters started. A lawyer Cordelia hired sent me a notice claiming I'd been harassing the family, that there were witnesses, that any attempt to claim the Hargrove name from my child would be met with a defamation suit I could never afford to fight. I was 24 pregnant, making $11 an hour, and they had a law firm. I lost the apartment first. My landlord got a call, I'm certain of it, though I could never prove it. Then I lost one of my 2 jobs when the diner suddenly had to cut hours, and somehow mine were the only ones cut. By the time I was 5 months along, I was sleeping on the floor of a friend's studio, and that friend was getting nervous because her boyfriend didn't want a pregnant woman crashing on their floor indefinitely. I want to tell you I was strong through all of it. I wasn't. There was a night on the Detroit Superior Bridge, late, cold, where I stood and looked at the water and let myself think about how quiet it would be. I'm telling you that part because somebody watching this needs to hear that the lowest place is not the last place. I walked off that bridge. I don't fully know why. I think it was the baby. I think it was the only thing I had left that nobody could buy or threaten away. I left Cleveland with a duffel bag and $300 to my name, and I took a bus as far west as the money would carry me, which turned out to be a town outside Tucson, Arizona. Desert. Dry heat that felt like an oven door opening. I'd never been further than Columbus before. I got off that bus with no plan and a belly out to here, and I sat on a bench in the station and I cried until a woman sat down next to me and asked if I was all right. Her name was Auntie Florence, though she wasn't my aunt and wouldn't be for a long time. She ran a laundromat and a boarding house attached to it, and she had a way of looking at a person that made you feel X-rayed and forgiven at the same time. She didn't ask me what I'd done or where I came from. She asked when I'd last eaten. When I told her, she stood up, took my duffel bag like it was hers to carry, and said, "Well, you're coming with me then. Can't have you having a baby on a bus station bench." She gave me a room. She didn't charge me for the first 3 months. She was there in the delivery room when my daughter was born on an August night. So hot the asphalt outside the hospital was still soft at midnight. I named her Imani. It means faith. It was the only thing I had when I had nothing else. And here's the part I never told a soul, not even Florence, for years. While I was in that hospital bed holding my newborn, a nurse came in to do the paperwork and asked for the father's name. And I said there wasn't one. I left the line blank. I made a decision in that moment, half delirious and exhausted, that the Hargroves had thrown us away and so they would simply not exist. As far as any record was concerned, Imani had no father. She was mine, only mine. They'd put a price on us, and I decided the transaction was final. That decision would matter more than I could have known. Building a life from the bottom is not a movie montage. There's no swelling music. It's just one impossible day stacked on top of another until somehow you look up and a year has passed and you're still standing. Florence taught me the laundromat business first, because it was what she had. But she also noticed something about me. I could not stop counting. I tracked every quarter that went into those machines, mapped out which hours were busy and which were dead, figured out we were hemorrhaging money on the dryers because half of them ran inefficiently. Within a year, I'd cut her utility costs by a third. Within 2, we'd opened a second location. Florence used to laugh and say I had a gift for finding the leak. She didn't know how right she'd be. I got my nursing degree at night, the one I'd abandoned in Cleveland, but I never ended up practicing it, because what I discovered I truly loved was the money side of things. The systems, the flow of it, where it went, where it disappeared, who was lying about it. I took accounting classes, then I got certified as a fraud examiner. There's a particular kind of person who is drawn to forensic accounting, and I think it's people who learned young that the world will lie to your face but a ledger can't. Numbers don't gaslight you. Numbers don't tell you it isn't personal while they ruin your life. Numbers just sit there and wait for someone patient enough to make them confess. I was very, very patient. By the time Imani was 6, I'd built a small forensic accounting firm of my own in Phoenix. We specialized in finding hidden assets in divorces and uncovering fraud in family businesses and estates. Estates. You see where this is going? I built a career out of following money through the exact kind of generational wealth the Hargroves had, learning every trick people like Cordelia used to hide what they had, move what they shouldn't, and erase what they didn't want found. I'm married, too. A good man named Emeka Okafor Bright, a pediatric surgeon with a laugh you could hear 2 rooms away and absolutely no patience for cruelty of any kind. He adopted Imani when she was 4. He is, in every way that has ever mattered, her father. When I tell you I built a life, I mean I built a fortress, and I filled it with people who would never put a price on me. I thought I was done with the Hargroves. I thought I'd left them in another life, in a cold city by a grey lake. Then my company got hired to investigate them. It came in like any other case, a mid-sized estate dispute referred to us by a law firm in Denver. A wealthy family's trust was being contested by a beneficiary who suspected the trustees were looting it. Standard work for us. I almost handed it to one of my associates. Then I saw the name on the file. The Hargrove Family Trust, established in Cleveland, Ohio. And the trustee under suspicion was Cordelia Hargrove. I sat in my office for a long time looking at that name. 7 years. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment in 100 different shapes over the years, and in all of them I was furious. But what I actually felt was cold and clear and almost peaceful, like the moment right before you solve an equation you've been staring at for hours. I took the case myself. What I found over the next 2 months was worse than anything I'd let myself hope for. Cordelia had spent the years since I left running the family fortune into the ground while pretending otherwise. The funeral home chain was failing, undercut by a national conglomerate, to keep up the appearance of wealth. The galas and the country club and the wing at the hospital. She'd been quietly draining the family trust. The one her own grandfather established, the one that was supposed to provide for every Hargrove descendant. And here is where it gets interesting. Theo, my Theo, the gentleman without a spine, was the contesting beneficiary. He was the one who'd hired the Denver firm. His own mother had been stealing from him, and he'd finally noticed. I could have walked away. Conflict of interest, easily justified. But I didn't, because as I dug deeper into the trust documents, I found something that made my blood go quiet and still. 2 years earlier, Cordelia had restructured the entire trust, and in the new language, she'd added provisions for what she called all legitimate Hargrove heirs and grandchildren. She'd been so confident, so certain of her own version of events, that she'd built the whole financial future of her family around the assumption that there were no other claimants, no inconvenient children, no granddaughter in the desert. She'd erased us so completely in her own mind that she'd bet the entire estate on our non-existence. But it was worse than arrogance. As I pulled the records, I found that 18 months ago Cordelia had hired a private investigator. The invoices were buried in the trust's expenses, disguised as legal consulting. She'd been looking for me, or rather, looking for the grandchild she'd suddenly remembered might exist, now that the trust needed an heir to satisfy a clause her own grandfather had written, a clause that released a $40 million reserve only when a living grandchild of the 3rd generation was confirmed. She didn't want her granddaughter, she wanted the key her granddaughter represented. Imani wasn't a child to her. Imani was a $40 million door, and Cordelia needed her to open it. I understood then why she'd come knocking eventually. The investigator had finally found us, so I did something that probably wasn't strictly ethical, but I'll let you be the judge. I didn't tell anyone yet what I'd found. I quietly assembled every document. The drained accounts, the disguised investigator invoices, the forged co-signatures, because yes, I found those too, places where Cordelia had signed Theo's name to authorize transfers he'd never approved. I built a case so complete and so clean it could have been entered into evidence the day I finished it. And then I waited. Because I knew she was coming. The investigator had my address by then. It was only a matter of time before she showed up trying to charm her way into my daughter's life or threaten her way in, whichever she thought would work. She chose a rainy Thursday in October. I was making dinner when the doorbell camera pinged my phone, and there she was. Older, smaller, somehow, her hair fully silver now. But those same pearls, that same coat that probably cost more than I'd made in a year back in Cleveland. And beside her, hanging back with his hands in his pockets, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth, was Theo. I let them stand there in the rain for a full minute. Then I opened the door. Cordelia's face did something complicated when she saw me. She'd expected to find a struggling single mother, I think. Someone she could intimidate or buy the way she had before. Instead, she found a woman in the paid-off house with a husband's medical degree on the wall and a calm that comes from knowing exactly how a story ends, because you've already read the last page. "Delphine," she said, and her voice had that warm, practiced sweetness I remembered, the funeral home sweetness, the voice that comforts you while it bills you. "We've come such a long way. May we come in? We'd love to see her. We'd love to see our granddaughter." I stepped back and let them in, not out of kindness. To let the trap finish closing, I made coffee. I had no intention of letting them drink. We sat in my living room and Cordelia did her routine. "The years had been hard," she said. "There'd been misunderstandings," she said, "mistakes on both sides. She wanted to make things right. Family was everything," she said, "and a girl, a granddaughter, deserved to know where she came from, deserved her birthright." She had a folder, of course. People like Cordelia always have a folder. She opened it and showed me a proposal, a trust distribution, a private school, an inheritance, all the things she'd give Imani if only I'd let her into our lives. Theo said almost nothing. He looked at the photos on my mantel. He looked at his hands. Once he opened his mouth like he wanted to say something to me, an apology maybe, and his mother talked over him, and he closed it again. 7 years and he still couldn't find his spine. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. When Cordelia finished her pitch, she folded her hands and waited, certain, the way she'd been certain at that country club table 7 years ago, that I would take what I was offered and be grateful. "You want to see your granddaughter," I said. "More than anything," she said. I let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable, until she shifted on my couch, and then I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile I give when an audit turns up the number someone swore wasn't there. "There's a problem with that," I said. "There's no granddaughter." Cordelia blinked. "I beg your pardon? There's no Hargrove granddaughter," I said. "There never has been. You can pull every birth record in the state of Arizona. You'll find a child born to Delphine Marsh, father unknown, father's line blank. You'll find that same child legally adopted at age 4 by Dr. Emeka Okafor Bright. There is no Hargrove anywhere on any document that has ever mattered. You threw us in the trash 7 years ago, Cordelia, and I made sure the trash stayed thrown out." Her face had begun to come apart. Theo finally looked up. You can't just," Cordelia stammered. "They're blood ties. A DNA test would prove." "A DNA test," I repeated, "would require my daughter to consent, and she's a minor, so it would require my consent, and I will spend every dollar I have making sure you never get within 100 yards of her. But that's not really why you're here, is it? Let's stop pretending." I reached down beside my chair and picked up the folder I'd prepared. Mine was much thicker than hers. I laid it out for her on the coffee table, page by page, the way you'd deal cards to someone who's about to learn they've been playing against a marked deck the whole time. The drained trust accounts. The galas funded with money that belonged to her own grandchildren. The investigators she'd hired and hidden. And then the page that made Theo stand up out of his chair. The transfers authorized with his forged signature, hundreds of thousands of dollars moved out of accounts that were legally his, signed by a hand that was not his. "You didn't come here for a granddaughter," I said. "You came here for a key. Your grandfather's trust releases $40 million when a living third-generation heir is confirmed. You spent 7 years pretending my child didn't exist, and now that you're bankrupt, you suddenly remembered her, because she's the only thing standing between you and the money you've already spent. You don't want to meet Imani. You want to cash her? The room was so quiet I could hear the rain on the windows. Theo spoke then, finally, for the first time in 7 years. He didn't speak to me. He turned to his mother. Is this true? His voice cracked. You signed my name? You've been stealing from the trust? From me? Cordelia opened her mouth, and what came out was not an apology. It was a justification. It's always a justification with people like her. She started talking about how she'd done it for the family, how she'd protected the name, how Theo had never understood what it took to maintain their position, how everything she'd ever done was for him. The same speech, I realized, that she'd probably given herself in the mirror every morning for years. The speech of a woman who had never once in her life been the villain in her own story. I let her talk, because every word she said Theo was hearing, and I could see something breaking in him that should have broken 7 years ago. I have one more thing to show you, I said when she finally wound down. I slid the last page across the table. It was a record I'd found in the oldest part of the trust archives, a record so old it had been hand-typed and scanned. It was a relinquishment agreement dated more than 30 years ago, a young woman named Margaret Hargrove, signing away all claim to the family and the trust, in exchange for a payment and a promise of silence. Theo's sister, the one who got pregnant young and was sent away and never spoken of. The one I'd bluffed about at the country club, not knowing she was real. She did it to your sister too, I told Theo, long before me. There's a pattern, you see. Anyone who threatens the name gets erased and paid off. Margaret, me. And she'd have done it to your daughter, except your daughter isn't a Hargrove. I made sure of that the day she was born. Cordelia spent $40,000 trying to make us disappear. And the irony is, it worked. We disappeared so completely that now her whole fortune is locked behind a granddaughter who legally does not exist. I stood up. You want to know the funniest part? I said. I didn't take this case for revenge. I took it because the Denver firm referred it and the work is good. Your own son hired me indirectly. The evidence I've assembled is already in the hands of the attorneys contesting the trust. By next week, the probate court will have all of it. The forgery alone is a felony. You're not getting the $40 million, Cordelia. You're not getting any of it. The trust will be frozen, audited, and most likely turned over to a court-appointed administrator. And the only living heir who could have unlocked that reserve for the family's a little girl in Arizona whose last name you'll never have. Cordelia stood too fast, and for a second I saw the woman from the country club, the one who told me some people are footnotes and some people write the story. You vindictive little, you planned this, she hissed. You've been waiting for this. No, I said quietly. You planned it. 30 years ago, when you decided money mattered more than your own daughter. I just happened to be the accountant who found the receipts. She left without the granddaughter, without the $40 million, without her son, because Theo did not leave with her. He stayed in his car in my driveway for almost an hour in the rain, and I watched him on the camera, his head down on the steering wheel. Then he drove away alone. I never let him meet Imani. He didn't ask to. I think in the end he understood he hadn't earned it. The case went exactly as I knew it would. The forensic file I'd built was airtight. Cordelia was charged with forgery and fraud against the trust. The funeral home empire, already failing, collapsed entirely under the legal weight. She wasn't sentenced to a long-term, white-collar justice rarely is, but the name she'd traded everything to protect became, in Cleveland society, a punchline and a cautionary tale. The wing at the hospital quietly took her name off the door. I drove out to the desert one evening, after it was over, out past the city to where the saguaros stand like old patient sentinels against an orange sky. I'd kept that check all those years. Not the original, she'd taken that back, that I'd written one to myself the night I left Cleveland, $40,000, payable to Delphine Marsh, signed nobody, just a piece of paper I'd carried to remind myself what they thought I was worth. I'd carried it through the bus ride in the bridge and the laundromat and the degree in the firm. I took it out there in the desert, and I tore it into pieces and let the dry wind take them, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The math was done. The accounts were balanced. Imani's 12 now. She knows the broad shape of the story. The age-appropriate version. She knows she has a father who chose her, a great-aunt named Florence who saved us, and a mother who would burn down the world before she let anyone put a price on her. She does not know the Hargrove name, and she will not, until she's old enough to decide for herself whether that's a door she wants to open. I've decided that part belongs to her, not me. I will not erase the way I was erased. But I will not hand her to wolves either. Sometimes I think about that woman on the Detroit Superior Bridge, the one who almost let the water have her. I wish I could go back and sit beside her the way Florence sat beside me in that bus station. I'd tell her that the people who threw her away didn't see her future. They couldn't. That was never their gift. I tell her that the worst night of her life was actually the first night of a life that belonged entirely to her. Family is not the blood that calculates your worth in dollars. It's not the name that decides whether you're a footnote or an author. Family is the stranger who carries your bag and won't let you have a baby on a bus station bench. It's the man who hears your daughter call someone else daddy and decides to earn the title anyway. It's the little girl named Faith who gave you a reason to walk off a bridge. If you've ever stood in the rain while a door clicked shut behind you, if anyone ever handed you a check and called it generosity, I need you to hear me. You are not the price they put on you. You are the woman you became when you decided to keep walking. So tell me where you're watching from, and tell me you're still walking, because I promise you the door they shut was never the only door. Subscribe if this story found you tonight, and stay a while. You are not telling your story alone. The night Cordelia slid that check across the country club table, she thought she was buying my silence. What she was actually buying was her own ending. She just couldn't read the receipt yet. That's the thing about people who treat other human beings like line items. They forget that every transaction has a second party who remembers the terms. She paid $40,000 to erase me, and that single choice set everything in motion. The bus to Tucson, the laundromat, the degree I earned at night, the career I built out of finding exactly the kind of lies she'd spent her life telling. Cause and effect. She planted the seed of her own collapse the moment she decided money mattered more than a grandchild. I think about what actually carried me from that bus station bench to my own paid-off house. And it wasn't luck. It was 3 things I had to learn the hard way. The first was refusing to become what they were. It would have been easy to let Imani believe she came from nothing, to poison her against a name, to take the check and the bitterness both. I didn't. I kept my hands clean so that when the truth came out, it was their corruption on the table, and not mine. Staying decent when you've been wronged isn't weakness. It's the only thing that lets you look your daughter in the eye later. The second was learning to think instead of just react. For 7 years I didn't rage at the Hargroves. I studied. I learned how money moves and hides and confesses. And when their case landed on my desk, I didn't need revenge because I had something far more powerful. I had understanding. Florence used to say I had a gift for finding the leak. The truth is, anyone can build that gift if they're willing to be patient and pay attention while everyone else is busy being angry. The third was the simple, stubborn refusal to lie down. That woman on the Detroit Superior Bridge had every reason to stop walking. She didn't. Not because she was strong that night, she wasn't, but because she chose to take one more step and then another, until the steps added up to a life. Strength isn't a feeling. It's a decision you make again every single morning, especially the mornings you don't feel it. If you take anything from what I lived, let it be this. The people who put a price on you are telling you about themselves, not about you. Keep your character intact when it would be easier to break it. Sharpen your mind when it would be easier to drown in feeling. And keep walking when every part of you wants to sit down in the rain. Cordelia bet her whole fortune on my disappearance. The cruelest joke of all is that she was right. I did disappear, and I came back as someone she could never afford.